All right, I'm seeing a lot of good activity in the chat, so let's get underway here. So, like I said, thank you everyone for joining. And today we're going to discuss how legal and sales ops use Ironclad to accelerate deal velocity and revenue close. My name is Nick Thompson. I am the senior deal desk manager here at Ironclad. I'll be the moderator today. This is my first time moderating, so thanks for bearing with me a little bit. But in terms of my actual background, I started my career at AppDynamics as an order operations analyst. From there, I went on to support many regions and segments of the AppDynamics business as a deal desk analyst and a deal desk manager. After 3.5 years at AppDynamics, I went to Data Robot as the chief of staff for the legal and the deal strategy and operations teams. That role was very much focused on project management initiatives as we built and scaled the deal desk and legal functions. And I've now been at Ironclad for a little bit less than a year. September 15th will be my 1-year anniversary.
Coming up.
I'm so happy today to be joined by Nick Bolton, the Senior Vice President of Sales Operations at Producepay, and Natalie Niadj, who is the Associate General Counsel at Productboard. Natalie and Nick, I want to turn it over to you to obviously introduce yourselves. Nick, do you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Nick. Thanks so much for having me. We're going to have to figure out how to do the Nick and Nick game here when we go back and forth, but two is better than one. So my name is Nick Bolton. I'm the Senior Vice President of Sales and Customer Operations, as Nick mentioned. I've spent my career in startups and early stage growth businesses. I'm currently at Producepay, which is an ag tech business that has a platform that provides growers and buyers of fresh produce access to a portfolio of services, including market insights, working capital, financing, distribution, supply chain services, and a variety of other needs that helps them move product from the farm all the way to the table. And I've been here about almost 15 months now. So excited to share a little bit with you guys today about the journey that we've had with Ironclad and Salesforce and how that's gone. And Natalie, I'll turn the mic to you.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the introduction and excited to be here today as well. I'm in charge of the legal team over here at Board. Productboard is a product road mapping platform used to validate ideas and collect user feedback. Prior to joining Productboard, I was on the legal team at Amazon Web Services, where I worked pretty closely with the sales team, primarily working on large enterprise deals. And so, yeah, I was the first legal hire over at Productboard. I've been here for about 2 years, a little over 2 years. And I was in charge of getting Ironclad all set up for our organization. So I'm excited to sort of share my experience today.
Awesome. Well, we're obviously so excited to have you both here. Before we get started, a few things to just, housekeeping. One, feel free to use the Q&A tab to submit questions. We're going to do our best to get to them at the very end. And then secondly, the webinar is going to be recorded, and we're going to send out a copy of the recording tomorrow. So like I said, today we're going to hear from two sides of the house, legal and sales operations, and get Nick and Natalie's perspective on how they built a contracting process with Ironclad that allows their sales team to get deals done faster and also allows legal and sales operations to focus where they're needed the most. We'll talk through some of the challenges that have been faced, how they rolled out a new process, and specifically what the impact of that process has been. So I'm really excited to also give you all a look at our Salesforce integration, which is essential to driving adoption, helping legal and sales for the sake of our customers. So let's get into it. I want to start by talking about the challenges. So I'm curious to hear from both of you. What did the contracting process look like when before you had Ironclad? What were some of the biggest bottlenecks? Natalie, can you give just a starting overview of what things looked like? And then Nick, we'll turn it over to you as well.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I was the first full-time legal hire over here. And when I started, we didn't have any kind of contracting tool or system. So there was a legal Slack channel where the team would just drop in their agreements with some basic context. Usually it was urgent or not urgent, which really means everything is urgent. And drafts would go back and forth just like in the comments in Slack. So it wasn't really great for version control or tracking. And at the end of the deal, you would get routed over to the customer. Sometimes the final version of the agreements wouldn't even make it back into a shared folder. So they just sort of stay in someone's email inbox. We did have like a kind of an internal G drive for forms. But a lot of times I would like update the form in the G drive and people will download them onto their own desktop. So the wrong forms would go out to the customer at the beginning of the deal. So it was kind of a little bit disjointed. And I would say that it was very reactive versus proactive. And by that, I mean, it was just kind of like I was a service desk. They'd toss over the agreement to me. There wasn't like a lot of like strategy. It was sort of just surviving at the beginning and pretty disorganized. So yeah, that was kind of the first, I would say, like 6 months I was here.
That has to be so many Slack notifications. Like
Yeah.
the Slack notifications like send a shudder down my spine. So I can't imagine every contract having a Slack notification. Nick, what about you?
I mean, Natalie basically just described what I walked into. Like very, very similar process. Slack notifications left and right in order to get work done. We actually used a form that wasn't a legal form to capture information from customers and get them to kind of like execute an agreement, which was not sustainable or scalable. And there wasn't really visibility between the customer's need, the sales team, and legal on what the actual requests were. We had a lot of different products. We have a lot of, I mentioned we have a handful of services. All of those have different requirements, but communicating that was obviously greatly difficult without having any tools, a lot of shorthand comments going back and forth. You said the word process. I wouldn't say that we had a process. We had a way of working so that we could figure out how to get the customer some form of agreement, but it wasn't really done in an enterprise way. And we've kind of moved into more of an enterprise sales model, and we needed to be able to support the business in a much different way. So that's when we approached putting in Ironclad, and I'm excited to share a little bit about that journey today.
Awesome. Like I said, I joined Ironclad close to a year ago, and when I joined, we were obviously already using Ironclad for our internal contracting process, but Deal Desk was a brand new dedicated function at Ironclad, and so I found that we needed to create playbooks and swim lanes and all of these different things between the functions that support a sales organization. Obviously, you have legal and sales ops, but you also have finance, revenue accounting, customer success, professional services. And then you have all of these different types of agreements. You got order forms, ESAs, SOWs, like it could be any number of things. From a deal desk and sales ops perspective, I think we face like the same universal issue, which is needing visibility and setting up approval processes. I'm curious from y'all's perspective, what was the relationship between sales and legal? What did that look like? Obviously, we had a ton of chaos, Slack notifications, informal processes. But what did the relationship itself look like between sales and legal when you first started kind of pre-Ironclad implementation?
Natalie, you want to go first?
Yeah, I can start. Yeah, so we didn't have a deal desk when I first started. We do now. And I'll start off by saying, like, I love my sales team. I love my sales ops team. We did have a sales ops team when I joined. But I could tell, like, when I first joined, there was just a lot of frustration. Like I said, we were on Slack, very heavily on Slack. So we had a legal Slack channel. People would drop things in there. And then we had like a security Slack channel if there was a security addendum. And then there was a finance Slack channel. So someone would have to take one agreement, put it in the legal Slack channel, drop it then into the security Slack channel, then into the finance one, then tag me in, ask me if like we had all the right information. And it was just like not efficient at all. And it was starting to get kind of frustrating because, you should be, as a salesperson, working on just selling. You don't need to be worrying about, passing things back and forth between Slack channels. And at the same time, like I was getting just so many separate DMs and I was working on like 40, 50 deals a month. And you just started to lose track of like who's asking you for what is this deal for? So I was really lucky to have like a very good team around me, and they wanted to like help me implement something new, or they wanted to like improve it for me. But it was just very inefficient, and I had no way of tracking like, was finance really signed off? Was security really signed off? like, did they actually review or not review? It was really just more like if I had to pay very close attention to Slack, which is when you have like that large of a volume of deals, it's just very difficult to do.
Yeah, Natalie, that sounds also eerily familiar. We also have risk in addition to legal. When we're doing financial agreements, we have to consider that as well. So we had the same sort of approval challenges. I'll also state that our relationship with legal is great. The teams work together really well. Like it was really all in service of the client. It was just that the tooling wasn't really there for us to communicate effectively between each other. And the approvals would happen out of band and maybe in an email. And then in Slack, you'd have to go back and be like, did the approval occur? And, yeah, I got the approval. Did you get the approval? And there's a lot of back and forth, a lot of time wasted trying to figure out if deals could go out at a particular time. And one of our core value propositions is speed. So we need to be able to provide our customers with, financing quickly. And so anything that we can do to make the process more efficient and more effective for our internal teams is actually going to help our customers. So legal was being sort of thrashed at the 11th hour when sales came in and said, hey, we need this deal and we need it done quickly. And that was never helpful. And now, obviously putting in some of those tools in one place has greatly created some efficiency for our teams.
Yeah, I love this comment from Rachel in the chat. She said the team can be strong and aligned and the process can still be tough. And in my experience, like there's supporting sales as a team sport, right? There's all of those different functions involved and everybody has a role to play in it. But as strong as the process can be, it can still sometimes be really difficult as you think about just how many people are involved in negotiations at times. So turning it into like the next phase, right? Rolling out a better process. It's clear, I'm sure there was a moment where it became clear that you needed a better solution for the contracting process. And so you kick off, a contract lifecycle management evaluation. That's a huge task. I'm curious, Natalie, I'll kind of start with you, but given the teams that are involved in the contracting process, obviously it's not just legal, it's not just sales ops, and a CLM solution is really used by pretty much everybody in an organization once it's stood up. How did you ensure that the right teams were involved in that buying process?
Yeah, I think there's like a couple of components here. So the first being, I wanted to make sure that whatever tool that we were working with, it didn't just work for me, but it was super intuitive for the go-to-market teams. If it's not intuitive, they're not going to use it. And then the other thing that I always think about when I'm buying a tool, and I think it's even more important now in this, macroeconomic environment, is it needs to be a tool that one is going to work for like other teams as well. So I always look at it for an eye of like, can I also use this for vendor agreements? Could I also use this on the HR side? And I want to make sure it's something that can scale with us. So it needs to be something where like I can see its use case now, but I could also see its use case in like 2 years and expanding across our organization. So that being said, I initially started with our VP of sales because, they're the head of the team that would be the first kind of core user. And then I involved finance as well very early. And I think especially now you want to get your finance team involved super early in the process so they understand the problem that you're solving and the value prop. And I also knew that like IT and security, they would be core like approvers in the tool. So I had them just take a look at it as well. And then, as we started to get deeper into the process, I kind of saw the wider applicability. So I saw that this could become a tool that we use for consulting agreements on the HR side. This could be a tool that we use for vendor agreements. So like I started to see other use cases. So I didn't have them part of the demo, but what I did was I set up a meeting like 30 minutes and I'm like, hey, I'm buying this. I think this would be useful for you. And so maybe I did it a little bit of like overkill here, but I think that really did help kind of push it over the finish line.
Yeah, I've actually had the fortune, I guess, of implementing Ironclad twice. So I had two sort of different journeys at two different businesses. And the first one started out with more of Natalie's approach, where legal came and wanted to do the analysis, and they were sort of the lead. And I was the first person that they called and said, "Hey, look, we're looking for a solution, and we know that this needs to meet your needs because you're one of our biggest problems. There's a big opportunity to solve the coordination process if we can come up with a better tool." And it started from legal and went through a very similar process. Here, it was more driven by a need where there was a lot of signals, and I had some experience having seen a solution before. So when the signals started to come up like, hey, we needed to have a tool because we need to have contract storage that's different than we have it today. What Natalie described in the beginning, is it in a G drive? Is it in Slack? We can't find it. We need to have different access levels and permission levels to get into the agreements because one user was being shared previously. And so those sort of things came up, and business operations was the one that raised the flag and said, hey, we need to do something. And so having implemented it before, we got a handful of teams together on the first call, risk, legal, and sales primarily, in addition to business operations, in order to kind of run through the implementation process and sell in for the team. We described kind of what our main problem cases were, like what were the things we were trying to solve for. And then we brought Ironclad into the evaluation process, having already looked at a few other solutions and done it twice. I had kind of like a T-chart of the pros so that I could show it to the team and what would help. Workflow, how would that change? Contract management and storage, how would that change? How would the things that you guys are doing that I had some visibility into now, like approvals and email that aren't trackable, or these Slack messages, how do we solve for some of those things? Different types of agreements, we had several. So getting all the teams involved that are in each one of those functions, they had to have awareness, like Natalie mentioned. And we did that by kind of putting together like a quick and dirty PowerPoint business case, and then sharing it with other teams and then bringing them along the journey for our implementation.
And that's a really interesting point just around the journey of an implementation. I'm curious, like, how did you each approach the implementation? Was it, hey, we want to be wall to wall with Ironclad in X amount of time? Or was it, hey, let's do a couple of different workflows, a couple of different agreements, and see if we can scale from there? Like, what was the philosophy as you kind of got started in that conversation? And how were you viewing, quote unquote, like a successful implementation?
Yeah, I mean, new tools, they're just never easy. There's just some amount of time that it's involved in setting it up. I thought that Ironclad actually did a really good job of assigning us someone to help us with onboarding. And my definition of success at the beginning was, let's just set up a couple of workflows that are the main things that our sales team, the agreements that they're sending out, they're the main ones. And let's see if they're just like even using it. So I thought, 80% of adoption even was like a lot. Like that was what I measured as success. And if I could do that in 2 quarters, I was like even happy with that. So I don't know if the threshold was very low, but that's kind of what I was aiming for. And then, just to get into the implementation, I really think the most successful rollouts are from top down. It's harder to ignore your manager when they're telling you, hey, this is a new tool we're using, than it is if another team is just pushing it down on you. So that being said, like I kind of just put together like my own guide with a couple of screenshots just showing how to open a request. So it was like very bare bones. I scheduled a meeting with our exec team and the managers on the sales side. And we start every meeting here with, what's in it for me, like a slide on what's in it for me. So I just basically explained to them the value prop and how this is going to save them time by being more efficient, and helping them collaborate. And then I just trained them on how to use the tool. So by the time I was rolling this out to the whole sales org, their managers were just echoing the things I was saying. So I think it's really important at the core of it to treat other teams like even if it's like your sales team or whoever it is, if you're rolling out a new tool on them, to treat them like humans. And that sounds kind of silly, but if you're getting a new tool that's rolled out on you, it's going to disrupt kind of your normal process. So I tried my best to try to not disrupt the normal processes our sales team was going, and just show them, hey, this is a faster way to do things. And I've prepared all of these materials to help you succeed. So there isn't a lot of downtime. I also did set up like monthly office hours at the beginning, just so I can answer questions about Ironclad, but we ended up not even really using it because it was pretty intuitive.
Yeah, I agree in terms of like the phased approach, right? The way that we started is we picked the thing that was going to be the sort of highest velocity, easiest to implement, and was one of the core like challenges that we had. And we started with that because we wanted to show success early. I have a similar philosophy when like trying to get new tools implemented, especially with salespeople. It has to be required because if you have the choice to use it or not use it, you're always going to end up just not using it. So it's got to be required, and that's got to come from getting that buy-in early. It needs to add value, like the what's in it for me. It has to add value to them. They have to be able to get something out of it. You got to be able to articulate that, and then it's got to be tied to some sort of business critical function, something that they need to do in their daily life in order to complete their job. So by taking something that was going to start with a contained group of users first, that was how we were going to measure success. Like, can we get 100% of these rolled out for this agreement type, for this cohort of users, so that they could start using the tool? And then we also had to paint the vision that this is like not going to be just a point solution. This is not like something that's going to go away. Like, in any tech business, there's flavor of the week tools and they're coming up all the time. So we had to paint the picture of every agreement that the commercial team is going to request is going to go through this same process and workflow. We're just starting here. So paint the bigger picture, get them to get buy-in, then create some sort of short-term phased approach where you can really clearly show measured success. And then you got to tell them that you're going to do it, then you got to do it, and then you got to show them you did it. So you got to go back to the team and say, hey, look, we've implemented this first version of the agreement. This one's done. Here's what's coming next. We're lucky because we have a world-class sales enablement team. So framing this is to the sales folks has been really easy for our team to really understand how this is going to work within our ecosystem here. But I think you can take any of those sort of, you can take the model and apply it to any sort of implementation.
In your evaluation, I'm curious, was there any specific data points that you were tracking about? We just talked about the various agreements and the different ways that you could approach it from a phased perspective, but was it as simple as like, hey, I want to get, Natalie, you mentioned 80%, like 80% of order forms through Ironclad, or I want 90% of my ESAs to be initiated. Like, were there like clear metrics that you were now able to kind of put in place to measure success? Whereas previously, like I'm used to like deal desk over email. And you look back on a given quarter and it's like, well, how many deals did we do? It's like, well, I got to go through 97 email threads and figure out, which deals closed, which ones didn't. Where did it all kind of shake out from a data perspective? And sometimes quantifying that is like borderline impossible. So I'm curious, like, were there metrics that you kind of mapped back to as you're doing the evaluation or the implementation to say, like, this is kind of our North Star for what, percentage of order form workflows versus ESAs versus revenue closed, like any sort of data advancements that you were able to make through the implementation?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll jump in first here, Natalie. Like for us, this was a key point of purchase decision for us. This is about being better together, sales and legal, and we really felt like we needed some help on the legal side to enable us to move faster. And we had some tools that would show us things like, what's your pipeline look like? What's your deal closing velocity? How many agreements are you doing of different types? And we could show that information to give context to our teams, but which deals are falling out, where are they falling out, why are they falling out? Well, we operate, especially in our business today, as I mentioned, speed is a real big decision-making process for them. So if we don't deliver something quickly, we can drop some of the opportunity that we'd have. So being able to show things like aging, being able to present data that helped us help legal and sales operate better, where we could say, hey, look, we have these different types of agreements that we're looking to process. We're getting the majority of them now done quicker because we're passing information and data. The customer's getting it faster in the life cycle. Now these are the points that are sticking. We had no visibility into those kind of things prior, and being able to tie in aging, tie in those metrics connected to the different agreement types we had, and then bring that to the team so that they had visibility into where some of those challenges were, helped us improve deal flow, and also helped the two teams kind of cooperate like a lot better in terms of understanding what the needs were so that we could resource effectively for both legal and sales.
Yeah, I agree. I guess like there's on the adoption side, I wanted to make sure that, at least 80% of the team was using it. We were able to get to like 100%, I think, once we got through the first quarter of using Ironclad. But I think there's the metrics that it kind of helped me track, which became valuable. So we went from kind of becoming reactive to a lot more proactive. And that's kind of how I knew that this was a success. So just some of the metrics that we started to track internally using the tool are, on the legal side, it's like the things you care about, like the payment terms, commercial terms, proprietary terms, and what I call the big three, like limitation of liability, warranties, indemnification, and changes to our SLA. So it was really important that I was getting a picture of like, what are we negotiating here? And are we being competitive with our competitors? Like, and kind of like how we're framing our agreement. Where are we getting pushback the most? Are we being flexible enough? Do we want to make changes to our form based on what we're saying? So it helps me kind of clarify some of those metrics. And then I think on the softer metrics, it allowed me to start tracking, when was an agreement generated and how long was each cycle back and forth with the customer? How long did it take us to return red lines, and how long did it take them to return red lines? How long did the entire deal cycle take for us? And from that, it's something that's interesting because I started to find in that process some data that, we were sending the agreement out and it would take like a month to get it back. And I'm like, why is it taking a month to get it back? Are we sending it out too early? I also started to realize okay, do we need to do capacity planning? Clearly, we're seeing a slowdown on just the red lines going back. Like, is it because we need to hire another person? It did help to support my argument that we need another person because there's just too many deals. And so, we use this data also to set up our OKRs internally and find areas of improvement. And some of those OKRs, they really led to like big projects that have really vastly helped the team. And so I think from those things, you can kind of see it's like a success. Like the team is adopting it. When we get to a renewal, and my finance team will kill me for saying this, but it's kind of like a no questions asked, like, yeah, of course we need this tool. It's not like this is like a maybe not required tool. And then I'm also seeing that we're getting OKRs set up just based on the data, and it's helping me set those OKRs and really improve the deal process. So I think those are some of the things that are like I kind of see as like, okay, this is a success. This is working.
Yeah, I'll double tap on that OKR comment, like tying this into metrics and then being able to like show back to the business how you're doing. It's a big part of our process now, whereas like during the implementation was more like how many agreements went through this new process. Now it's more like we want to move the deal time from 20 days to 15 days. This is one of the solutions, right? And how does this tie back to like the how?
For sure. Natalie, I want to double click on what you were talking about, which was the limitation of liabilities, the indemnities. With prior to Ironclad, like how were those being tracked? Because in my mind, like as a non-attorney, I hear those terms get thrown around and I'm like, okay, that's like basically the risk profile of a company, right? So it's one thing to like, navigate a deal cycle or, for a deal to slip through the cracks, but to have like a really good grasp of what risk profile looks like for a given company, like was that all being tracked manually, or was that you don't have to get too far into the detail here, but like I imagine Ironclad helped to be able to track some things like that from a dashboard and a repository perspective.
Yeah, like I'll say like I came from Amazon previously, so I kind of set up like how we track based on how they tracked over there, how they track key terms, and everything was manual over there. So it was just like an Excel spreadsheet, honestly, and there was like some key terms. And I'll say like one of the big things when you're so reactive and you're so disorganized because you don't have a contracting process, it's really hard to like sit down and be like taking notes on like, hey, like what did we agree on for caps here, and like let's set some rules, because you're just being hit with so much information. So once like Ironclad came in and we got some organization around it, I was able to start setting like I kind of use the information like tab, I guess, that you fill out in Ironclad to start like tying out like what did we agree to on these deals and start tracking it. And based on that, I was able to sort of like put reports together. And at our company, and like many other companies, there's usually like a risk committee. A risk committee is required as part of, SOC 2 ISO certifications. So I was able to go into these risk committees, which is usually your executive team, and they want to hear about like the key risks from the last quarter. And I could use kind of the limitation of liability and the warranties and indemnification data that I was grabbing on like what super caps we were giving, what indemnities we were giving, what was the range of customer size that we were giving these gives to, and put some like rough data. Like it's not going to be perfect. Like there's so many different variables here. You can't be like with 100% certainty this is our company's exposure. But you can kind of get a picture of like what did we sort of agree to, what is the customer size, and ideally how that like kind of translates later on is you want to be able to say between this size of customer and this size we are willing to make these gives, below that we're not willing to make those gives. And it helps you calibrate your risk, which is it's really important. And it also is important for like, just like insurance policies. Like each company has an insurance policy. It usually applies to all of your customers. And if we had a widespread, kind of outage or something happened where we had a widespread data breach, it kind of gave me a better picture of like what would our exposure be, which was really something I was trying to understand. It's not going to be perfect, but it gives you kind of a picture.
Yeah, and hopefully it doesn't come to that. Wouldn't wish a data breach on anyone.
Yeah.
So, with that being said, like we obviously talked through change management. I've found personally that when a new system is in place, the change management initially is the hardest part, right? That initial rollout, but then everything that we've changed from the initial launch has made it easier and easier. We're automating more. The process is becoming even more streamlined. So like the overall enablement curve has gone down significantly every time we launch something new in terms of an update or a piece of progress. I actually just made an update to our own Salesforce and Ironclad integration, and so our AEs can now launch an order form from Salesforce in 2 clicks. I think we have a demo recorded. If y'all are curious to check it out, let's see if we can turn it over there. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to show how Ironclad is using our own Salesforce integration to create data integrity between Salesforce and Ironclad and to significantly streamline the order form launch process. For this demo, I have already created my quote in Salesforce CPQ. To kick off the order form workflow launch within Salesforce, all I have to do is click this green Launch Order Form button in the Ironclad Workflows object. Thanks to the data synchronization and field mapping between Salesforce and Ironclad, our sales team kicks off an order form workflow in Ironclad by answering just 2 questions. The first is, what type of contract is this? An order form for new business or an order form for an add-on business? And then answering the question of, has the customer requested to negotiate our online enterprise services agreement? We give our sales reps the ability to add an option to buy, but everything beyond that is automatically mapped from Salesforce CPQ for them. All they have to do is to launch the workflow and create the order form by clicking the blue Submit button at the bottom of the page. Within the Ironclad workflow object, our sales team can Post a comment in the activity feed of the Ironclad workflow, maybe to legal or to sales ops. They can also send an email to the counterparty containing the order form as an attachment. They can even view a current version of the order form on our right-hand side here in the Ironclad documents section. And lastly, they can approve the workflow. All of this is obviously done without having to open the workflow page in Ironclad itself. The workflow object includes links back to the related opportunity, to the related CPQ quote, and as well as a workflow link to the Ironclad page if you want to enter Ironclad. This has been a massive boost in streamlining our order form negotiation process, and we hope that it has the same results and the same experience for your sales team and the teams that are supporting sales. Thanks.
It's great.
All right.
Great to see, Nick. When I first implemented Ironclad the first time, that beautiful integration that keeps sellers in Salesforce able to do almost everything from one place it wasn't quite there yet. It's a gorgeous thing because you can move a lot faster as you just showed, and being able to do everything as a seller in one place is huge for them. That's when we talk about adoption and tooling and them being able to kind of understand exactly how the workflow works for them. Being able to see it in your own ecosystem is really important. So I love the new integration, and that looks like it'll create a bunch of efficiency for your team.
Yeah, I like the term just kind of meeting folks where they are, and for our sales team, obviously that's Salesforce. I don't think I have much of a future as a sales engineer here at Ironclad doing demos, but hopefully the efficiency of the Salesforce integration showed through for a couple minutes there. But yeah, it's been massively helpful, very influential to our process. And I think, from an experience perspective, our sellers are walking away with a positive contracting experience each and every time using it, which is great. So now I want to flip it over to kind of the solution and the impact conversation, post implementation. We've talked about, reducing the number of steps that it takes, refining the approval process, and building the contracting process for scale. It certainly helped our team to spend more time on revenue generating activities. It's allowed our deal desk and legal teams to continue to support a growing sales function. But I'm curious from both of y'all's perspective, and Nick, I'll start with you. How has rolling out Ironclad and building a new contracting process impacted the speed with which you're able to execute agreements?
Yeah. So for us, the two things that I think it really helped with, one's internal and one's external. Our prior process put a lot of the onus on the customer because we weren't using a lot of the data that already exists in Salesforce that we already had stored, and we were replicating that because we didn't have a tool like Ironclad. So I love that you just showed that demo, because information about what gets pulled in, all of that non-editable field, you can imagine the customer had to put that in again. So they've already probably told the sales rep, they filled out a marketing form, they gave you all that data early, and then we're asking for it again and again from the client, and it slows down the sales process and it puts more on the customer. So that was really helpful for us to be able to speed up our sales process, was actually to leverage the data and the confirmed information that the salespeople were already doing in the sales process and just propagate that for them right in the contract. So that was one piece. And then the second piece was really for our internal teams. I talked a little bit earlier about how there's a lot of thrash on chasing whether an approval was completed, chasing whether the deal was approved by sales before it went to legal. So there's a lot of questioning, hey, did this get approved by legal? That's the second one. The first one is, were we allowed to actually sell this? And being able to say definitively, by the time that you receive the agreement, it's already going to be approved by sales. It's already gone through an approval process. We had a workflow that was set up. It has, and now we talked about it earlier, we have different tiers of risk, different tiers of pricing. So we use those tierings based on, what is the sales volume, what's the value of the client, like what are the different considerations that you need to use to pipe different approvals. Now we know it's approved. So that efficiency enables the next team to work faster, and that really helped drive down the total time that it takes for us to close a deal. And then from the client perspective, at the end of the day, as I mentioned earlier, then they're receiving the agreement faster and makes it so that if there's any of those adjustments or red lines, we're able to respond quicker because we're not spending the time chasing down those internal approvals. So it kind of all builds on, one another in terms of we have finite resources and time. And so if you're using that time to do things like close deals instead of, chase the customer to fill something out or chase your internal teams to verify whether something was completed, you can close more business.
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like it's not just about speed, it's about creating repeatable processes and systems that give you deeper visibility. So like in the short-term gain that you have is you have a centralized place, you can see all the emails going back and forth with the customer. You can collaborate with the team members more quickly. There's version control, which is super important because it's just like awful not having something that can help you redline. You get approvals faster. There's no more chasing these approvals. Like you kind of know everyone's on the same page. As soon as a deal goes to signatures, as soon as the deal is done, you have the centralized repository. You're not chasing on that side either. So I think there was these short-term gains there were so many people that were like reaching out to me and DMs saying like, hey, I've got this deal. And then just the back and forth and things getting lost, like over time that kind of adds up and it's just not efficient. So you save time there, but then there's the longer term gains. And so those are just being able to speed up the deal cycle by looking at, hey, like what are the kind of deal sizes? What are some of the asks we're giving out? We should really have like an approvals process around these types of asks and being able to like kind of take a step back and be proactive. So, it's really getting out of that like reactive, like I have like just deals hitting me and just every customer is pinging me, to getting to that proactive, like now I'm really thinking critically about how are we contracting and how are we doing deals, and being able to kind of understand like this deal is going to be a little bit different than this deal. And maybe we're okay giving this out, but we're not okay with giving, X out. And it also helps you as you're hiring for your teams too, because you want to be able to have rules of the road for people that are joining your team so they understand like we're okay with this or we're not okay with this for this like tier of customers. And that's really hard to do when you're in reactive mode versus like in proactive mode. So, just being able to bring people in and ramp them in faster, that also helps too, because you get extra hands that come on board and they kind of know, okay, here are the rules of the road, and they can just jump in and start working.
Yeah, I really like what resonated with me there was the term like repeatable, predictable processes. From my perspective, like as a deal desk, I always think the barometer of like a successful deal desk is one where if the deal desk team gets involved on a transaction, the close rate of that deal is higher than if deal desk was not. And one of the things that I'm tracking from like a metrics perspective, hopefully by creating these like repeatable, easy processes and the predictability, is actually having deal desk less involved in our cycles. Like deal desk doesn't need to be looking at every deal. The ultimate goal would be for deal desk to be involved in the truly like strategic transactions where maybe we're customizing pricing, we're customizing terms and conditions, like for these specific customers where we're trying to drive a little bit of like a value added differentiator. And so as I think about like the metrics, it's easy to track SLAs, it's easy to track involvement through Ironclad, and it's impossible to do that over email. But I'm actually trying to track to a lower metric where it's like, can we get deal desk involvement down, but can we get deal desk involved in the right transactions, which is the high dollar strategic top of forecast types of deals. I'm curious from your perspective, like we've talked a little bit about the data, we talked a little bit about the risk profile, but Natalie, I'll turn it back over to you to just understand the full scope of the metrics and the data that you're potentially looking at, because what you just said also jumped out in terms of um, teams are very lean right now, right? Like deal desk and legal functions are very lean. And so I found that having that data helps to tell the story of like, what does productivity look like? You know, where am I spending my time and my limited resources? What are some of the data that you're looking at maybe outside of the risk profile?
Yeah, I think like the my goal, and this sounds odd, but it's to be boring. Like I want to make the process like very boring. So it's like if you have a request, like you're bored and you know like this is how it gets done. Like you're not asking me panicking, how do I get this over to you? When should I kind of like expect the deal back? So like, you know, the Ironclad tool, it kind of helped me make the process boring. So everyone kind of knows this is where you go and this is what you do if you have a request. On the metrics, like I kind of touched on the soft metrics that we've been tracking. And so just to like break it down a little bit more, it was really like when was the workflow created? So like when I think of when the workflow is created, it's kind of like when did this customer even come on our radar as somebody that we're potentially selling to? When do we first send the agreement out? Because I can see all of this in the platform is like when did they download or email the document out to the customer?
Yeah.
And then how long did it take for us to get it back? And then, you know, just how many rounds did it take for us to, you know, get to a final solution? And I can kind of like see in the like Ironclad, like, hey, like these are usually the ones that we're coming down to like the final, they're becoming the final issues for us. And this is kind of like where maybe we have a couple more rounds of red lines that we're going back and forth on. And then you also kind of see like signature process, like how long is it taking us to get through the signature process? Like we'll initiate it and then usually there's approvals. Like what tier of customer do we see these approvals on? And it's not, again, like it's very hard to say for like legal that like there's like it's not this black and white. Like, you know, you could have like a company that you wouldn't expect them to have like a ton of processes, but they just happen to have a lot of processes. So it's not going to be like clean and black and white and now we're seeing patterns, but I try my best to use these soft metrics to understand the patterns that we're seeing. And then you like it's every legal team that I know, that one of the questions I have is like, how do you know what capacity is for someone on the legal team? Like, how do you know if someone's like too swamped? And so like from this I can kind of see like a little bit of like, hey, like it's just taking a little bit longer. If I'm seeing like a longer increase and just like things going back and forth, or like it probably means that because there's like too many deals, the volume is pretty high. And it kind of like just cues for me, like maybe I should check in and see like, you know, how is the volume for that person. But like it kind of gives you some rough data. And like again, nothing is black and white. There, it's all kind of like a gray area. But like you're trying to just kind of make sense of chaos and sort of try to pin down what the patterns are.
I don't think boredom is a bad term at all to use. I think anybody who's been involved in like an end of month or end of quarter escalation that's like a surprise uh, wishes for more boredom. So I'm personally striving for it a little bit more. Nick, what about you?
I love that you guys are working on doing less deals and being bored. That's great. That's aspirations. I think I'll kind of break it down into a few different like chunks. So one of them is you know we want to look at things like aging and duration and how long it's taking, like Natalie described. But sometimes that's just to show us that there's an opportunity to do something else. So for us, like we would identify, hey, when are we sending this out to the customer? Well, the customer's not really getting it back to us in a really long time. Well, why is that? It's because they were really using this just to understand what our agreement terms were going to look like. They weren't using it to actually buy yet. So how does this map to your sales process, right? Like, how do you connect your sales process and then your tools? And once you get that visibility and you have other teams asking those questions, like you have, the Natalies of the world saying, hey, they start looking at it and they go, why is your deal taking so long? And you have to be like, well, this is what's going on and this is what they're looking for. And that really helps like the teams start working better together, is to understand what's the sales process like, what are the where are we getting stuck, and where are we using certain things as tools. One of the things that we try to do is we'll try to trap these agreements that don't yet have necessarily defined structure or terms, and they're new. And we want to understand, as we're continuously evolving, we're bringing new products out there, like what are the things that are creating those opportunities for us to actually bring it back into Natalie's boring process where it can be standardized and easy to use. And we use the tool to help us measure some of those things. So we'll have custom agreements and non-custom agreements, and in the non-custom agreements, what are we actually seeing? It's hard to measure like at the same level of the time to sign and some of those things that you're tying back into your like funnel. But it's easier for us to actually look at it more qualitatively and be like, hey, we had 10 of these types of deals and it looks like it's going to be something we need to repeat. So how do we create that more boring process? So we use it for that as well. So I guess we're all trying to kind of get bored in some way, shape, or form. But then the last thing I'll say is that we also have seasonality in our business, because it's fresh produce. So you think about harvest seasons, you think about seasons for shipping. Grape season in Mexico can be like 2 months. So you have this spikes in like deals that you're doing over a certain period of time. Well, you need resource planning for that. And so being able to see, like Natalie mentioned, on terms of like how many people do you need and when do you need them, and showing some of that like cyclical nature to your business and being able to use that data to provide that back to the business helps them be able to staff and prepare for those particular times in the year.
Totally.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Well, I know we have a couple minutes left here. I'd like to turn it over to some Q&A. So I'm going to flip to the Q&A tab here and encourage anybody who's in the chat. Let's ask and answer some questions. Okay, there are questions in the chat too. Let's see.
All right. It looks like people are agreeing with us on goals, doing less deals, and getting bored. So that's good. We're all together in this.
Yeah, that's a good North Star. Okay, here's a good one. How have your teams addressed tool adoption issues from the other party, especially encouraging customers to use your preferred tools for redlining instead of defaulting to Word or Google Docs? So I assume that means tool adoption issues from the other party. So do you guys find yourself using like the Ironclad integration with counterparties frequently? Or what is your level of kind of experience with the collaborative nature of Ironclad with your customers?
I'm in your camp of meeting the customer where they are as much as we can. So when they want to send back a Word doc and we can use tools to do the comparison and see what's changed and view that, we'll accept it. We haven't really tried to force people into changing their behaviors. We've adopted to their needs for the most part, because it hasn't really had that deal impact for us. So it depends on kind of like what kind of business you're in. Are you doing like a lot of high velocity deals with a lot of red lines and a lot of feedback, and you're having to like work through those? Or are you doing more high velocity deal desk type deals where you're negotiating on terms, which are different than some of the sort of more legal conditions and things like that we talked about earlier? So my philosophy is always like meet the customer where they are, and then have the tooling hopefully support that as effectively as possible. And we've been able to use Ironclad for continuing to receive that information, then use it internally.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree with kind of just meeting the customer with where they are. There's a couple things. I agree with Cassie in the chat. The Ironclad Word editor has been game changing. And I think that you also rolled out like a PDF converter recently too. That's also been game changing for me. I mostly use the email feature. So there's a feature on Ironclad where you can copy like an email address and you can just CC that or BCC it, but we usually CC it on emails and it'll pull the email in. And then when they attach just like a Word document or new draft, it'll automatically pull that draft into the workflow. And then all you have to do on your end is, click the button that says update the workflow. And so it just automatically goes into Ironclad. So I don't even see the need to like even force them into like using the tool because it's like we have these email addresses that you can just use. So on their end, it's the same experience, but on your end, you're getting everything pulled in. It also helps me because sometimes I don't want my A's to like CC me into an email if like sometimes just adding legal is like scary. Some people are like, whoa, you have your legal counsel. Let's get our legal counsel. So sometimes I want them to have like a friendlier conversation. Even though I take offense to that, I think I'm like a friendly legal counsel, but like, so I'll have them like add that into the CC. So the email will get pulled in and I'll see what's going on and I can help them on the back end, but I'm not like, the monster on the email chain, I guess you could say.
I gotta say, I think one of the most refreshing things when I joined Ironclad was that I didn't immediately have to download Adobe Acrobat and expense it for PDF conversions back and forth into like file formats. I was like, this is awesome. Like, that's perfect. I want to try to answer one more kind of a quick rapid fire question here from Chris. He's asking, what are some of the biggest pain points or the most constructive feedback that you've heard from the sales team? If your sales team is anything like mine, they're full of feedback. So curious what y'all are hearing or having to address.
You want to go first, Natalie?
I'll say like the one thing that I've heard from our team, and this is because in the past, like they were using DocuSign like directly. They just had DocuSign licenses and then they got their DocuSign licenses revoked at some point and we got onto Ironclad. And the one thing that I've had them say as like constructive feedback is like, we wish there was just like a way for us to see, because, they on the sales team, they like to see like, did they open it? How many times did they open it? Can I ping them to remind them to sign? And so like Ironclad does have the reminder feature, so you can ping to remind people to sign. But I think it's more of a like, they just are really, and especially this is more of an end of quarter concern. They're just like, oh my God, like refresh. Did they sign? Did they look at it? Have they looked at it? Do I need to text them again? So that was like the one point. But otherwise, like I would say when we onboarded, everyone was like, hey, they were DMing me like, hey, Natalie, like, just so you know, like, this is super interesting and like cool tool, so easy to use. This is like night and day. So we also on the other side got like, really good positive feedback and people were really happy that we had something like this. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, on our end, we were changing their workflow pretty dramatically. As I mentioned earlier, they were not using really a tool at all to do some of this. In some cases, chasing people down for signatures by hand. In other cases, asking the customer to like add a bunch of information so that we could close or we could create the agreement for them and then giving it back to them. And the process took longer. And then there wasn't really visibility between us and the legal team. So most of the feedback that was really positive was around like being able to provide visibility bi-directionally so that you could see what's the state of the agreement. Is it in drafting mode? Is it in like, sent to the customer? Where is it at? We didn't have any of that visibility connected in the tool. So most of that has been really positive. Most of the new business opportunities that we have right now are just going into new regions. And as we go into new regions, figuring out ways to make it easier for what they're used to in terms of their contracting process. So those are probably the more constructive areas where their sales team is bringing feedback to us.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I see we have about a minute left. First, I want to wrap up by just saying, obviously, thank you, Nick and Natalie, for being a part of this. It's always like interesting to talk to sales ops and legal professionals about what you're seeing in your business, how you're approaching it and solving. I think we have a lot of very similar problems that a lot of teams are facing. And I know Ironclad's helping to solve them, which is a great feeling. I also want to wrap up with just a couple of announcements here. The first is that Ironclad will be at Dreamforce in San Francisco this year. We would love to see you there. If you're going to be in town, we're going to drop a link in the chat and send a follow-up emails with details on the breakfast that we're hosting. And then secondly, our next Ironclad Live is actually coming to Dallas, where I'm based. That'll be on September 7th in person, and then virtually it'll be cast on September 14th. We have some really exciting announcements that we don't want you to miss, so please be sure to save your spot. And if you do come in person, obviously stop by our booth, say hello. I want to meet everyone. So thank you to everybody who's tuned in. I don't know if I have a future in moderating, but I think this has gone pretty well. A very interesting conversation. And I hope everyone has a good rest of the day.
I think you have a
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Nick. And hopefully be cooler for you in Dallas in September. You'll be in good shape.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.